We believe that every woman can look stylish, whatever their shape.
But first, you have to learn what clothes do and don't suit you. Your best friend won't tell you the harsh truth about those sagging boobs and drooping bum.
But we're not your best friends, and we will.
Vanessa, we know you wear this because we caught you on camera wearing it. And this is a big girl's dress, and you're not a big girl anymore.
Find out what not to wear in a new series starting Thursday, 29th of November on BBC.
Casting a big hit over on BBC One. Don't miss the BBC Weather Girls high-stepping and singing their hearts out for children in need in about 5 minutes.
Where in the world can life spring from dust? Deserts. From the Namib to the Karoo, the Kalahari to the Sahara, a place of unforgiving sand and rock, where life can conquer against all odds.
Wild Africa, one continent, so many worlds. Wednesday at 9 on BBC Two.
Friday night's Newsnight and Newsnight Review now on BBC Two with Kirsty Walk and Mark Lawson.
British troops are on the ground, but the Northern Alliance commanders say they don't want them there. Is this an ominous sign of what's to come? Good evening. Tonight there's uncertainty about the role of British troops sent to Bagram Airport. The local warlords don't want them, so what exactly is their mission? At the gates of Kabul, finally, thousands of Azari fighters have arrived to protect their own tribe against the rival Tajiks in the city. We follow their incredible journey. Also tonight, reports that Osama bin Laden's deputy, one of America's most wanted men, has been killed, and also that the leader of the Taliban is ready to retreat from Kandahar. And this is the first day of Ramadan. Tony Blair and bin Laden both take comfort from the Quran. Is the lack of an ultimate spiritual referee Islam's strength or its weakness?
The entire ideological, theological system of Islam is knowledge-based. In Islam, knowledge is virtue.
And on Newsnight Review at 11, Charles Wheeler, Rosie Boycott and Paul Morley join me to discuss the RSC's aim to convince video-aged children that theatre's a wonderland, a cad cashing in on Britain's railways in BBC One's The Way We Live Now, media attempts to catch up with America's most wanted man, and a movie about Afghanistan under the Taliban.
Commanders of the Northern Alliance have been quick to criticise the arrival of British troops at Kabul's airport, where just days ago they were only too happy to have the SAS on hand to aid their overthrow of the Taliban. Now they say they have sufficient troops of their own to conduct the humanitarian mission and settle the country down in preparation for peace. But with signs that the warlords' fragile alliance against the Taliban is already fracturing, if more British troops are deployed through the country, might they be caught in a crossfire? Here's Liz McKean.
Bagram Airport, just outside Kabul, now sees the first overt deployment of British troops in Afghanistan. Unlike the other special forces, we're told the role of the 100 SBS troops is strictly peaceful. They're to secure the airport, preparing the way for the forthcoming diplomatic and humanitarian missions. Although local Northern Alliance leaders have signalled they're not wanted, they could be joined by up to 4,000 more British troops who remain on standby. There's no word about how long they'll go for or just how they'll stay out of harm's way. So what are they all getting into? The picture across Afghanistan is fractured and unstable. US bombers have been pounding Kandahar, as these pictures from the Al Jazeera agency show. Tonight the Taliban are reported to be pulling out of what was their stronghold. Favourite to move in is Hamid Karzai, one of 4 top warlords, now carving up the country between them. A moderate Pashtun leader backed by America, he told Newsnight tonight that Kandahar is there for the taking.
I plan to go to Kandahar very soon, together with other civilian leaders, And I hear already that there's trouble going on in Kandahar this afternoon, and I hear that the Taliban are on their way out. So I hope things will go on peacefully.
The Northern Alliance remain in control of Kabul for now, at least. The capital is riven by different ethnic groups. At Kunduz, thousands of Taliban are mounting a desperate last stand against the Northern Alliance. In Mazar-e-Sharif, the alliance have admitted massacring at least 500 foreign Taliban troops. Control over Jalalabad is being disputed by at least 2 rival factions.
The ones in the light camouflage garb are in fact American Special Forces.
These latest additions to US Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld's photo album show his special forces on horses fighting with the departing Taliban. But longer term, the peacekeepers can't rely on the support of American troops. As the Pentagon said it believed one of bin Laden's main men, Mohammed Atef, had been killed by airstrikes, it made clear its troops weren't in for the long haul. While the remains of Afghanistan are picked over, a multinational stabilisation force, presumably including these British forces on standby, will step into the breach. The UN is this weekend continuing its efforts to help Afghanistan towards the next stage, a workable government. The military campaign to oust the Taliban is working. The diplomatic campaign has a lot of catching up to do.
Liz McKean. Well, adding to the sense of uncertainty in Afghanistan, at least 1,000 heavily armed members of the Hazara tribe are now massing at the edge of Kabul. The Hazaras, the third largest ethnic group, recaptured their home province of Bamiyan from the Taliban following the fall of Mazar-e-Sharif. And now they've turned their attention to the capital in a bid to defend their fellow Shiite Muslims against feared persecution by the Tajik-dominated Northern Alliance. In this exclusive report, David Loyne travels with them on their epic journey through the Hindu Kush Mountains to Kabul.
A short helicopter ride over the Hindu Kush, the high, wide mountain wastes which dominate the centre of Afghanistan. At the time we flew last weekend, the ground below was still in Taliban control, and in places we were only 100 feet above the ground. It is not surprising that very few helicopters flew between the patches of land then outside Taliban hands. And what did they carry to supply armies at war? Not guns or ammunition, but money. Bales and bales of banknotes, the fuel needed to raise an army in the poorest region in one of the poorest countries in the world. On hand to supervise the delivery, the shadowy figures who conducted the campaign, Special Forces soldiers from the United States. That night, they began their assault on the Taliban in Bamiyan, in a battle where horses did most of the work. Here, there are few vehicles other than relics from the Russian era a generation ago. This jeep needed to be helped on its way by men who earned food for their families mending the roads. The food for work is distributed in the town of Yakovlang, alongside food given out for free by Oxfam to the poorest families from the hills. Yakovlang was the scene of one of the greatest atrocities of the Taliban era, when more than 200 men and a number of women and children were shot and the whole town burnt to the ground. Hundreds of other people were killed in raids on the surrounding villages earlier this year. And amid the ethnic cleansing, in one shop we found the remains of piles of burnt money. With their Arab bankers, the Taliban had money to burn. A few days later, after the Hazara army, with the help of their American backers, had forced the Taliban out of their homeland, we caught up with our money again, the cash which had come by air. Every man was to get 50,000 Afghanis, about £1 a day, for a new and more controversial task. Leaving behind their one tank newly captured from the Taliban, and the remains of one of their enemies lying in a ditch, the Hazaras are on their way to the capital. They gathered in a dramatic dawn meeting, beginning with a Hazara nationalist prayer.
When you enter the city, most of you may not know it very well, you should observe military order. When you go anywhere, you have to try your best to respect the people and value their honor.
The word Hazara comes from the Persian for 1,000, and they have raised an army of 1,000 for the move on the capital. They are around 20% of the population of Afghanistan and do not want to be forgotten. They came down from the mountains through a landscape only just freed from the Taliban, and they were in good spirits as they travelled into the night until they stopped half a day's drive away from the capital itself, waiting for further orders. Here, every soldier, down to a boy who they said is just 9 years old, filled their magazines with bullets. But he's very young, he shouldn't be a soldier.
Because he is very character, he is very intelligent boy.
Yeah.
He's very intelligent boy.
He should be in school if he's very intelligent.
Yes. He was in school, but when the fighting started his province, he took gun.
Iwaz told me he has killed Taliban fighters, most recently in the battle for Bamyan this week. And when I asked him why, he said he fought for freedom. He was coached in his answers by a commander only twice his age, who has himself been fighting since he was a boy. And now they wait to negotiate the exact terms of their entrance to Kabul. Many of these men had relatives killed by the Tajik army who are now in the capital in fighting in the early 1990s, and they fear it could happen again. It was, I suppose, inevitable that once Kabul had fallen, other armies would try to reach the city. The failure of the international community to secure a political settlement before the fall of the capital means that once again in Afghanistan, political ambition needs to be backed up with military muscle. Their leader is planning to take the troops in with him when he goes next week, and he swats aside questions as if every politician in the world takes 1,000 armed men around with him.
It's my home. I return to my home. It's not a crime if I go on my own or with 2,000 men. We are not going to fight there. We hate fighting.
Ustav Halili says there was an agreement that the UN would go in first, which was broken. He is looking for order.
We have to find a logical solution for the problems of Afghanistan. We need a central system. Then, when we capture a region, we can control it.
As we finished our interview this morning, there was an extraordinary arrival. Former Taliban commanders came for talks. They control land between the Hazara homeland and the capital, and they still control it now that the Arabs and Pakistanis have gone or been killed. American political advisors were again waiting in the wings. We bumped into the Taliban again by chance when they broke down on the road. Local men of influence still negotiating the destiny of their region while converting to the latest cause to keep in power. They carried their weapons through the Hazara area. But the town where they negotiated with Ustav Halili shows scars of the horrors of the last 5 years, which are also carried around in the minds of the people.
I was in my house when the Taliban came and arrested me in my house. They took me to the place that they killed more people. I saw all the killed people. They wanted to kill me, but they quarreled between them.
So what was in your mind when they were quarrelling for your life? What do you think?
I was thinking about my life. Just I didn't believe that I will be alive.
You went to prison, but some people never even made it to the prison. I think they died along the way.
Yeah, they wanted to carry, the Taliban wanted to carry them to Jawzjan prison. But during the way, they died. And the container, you know container? Yeah.
The Hazara leader addressed his people during Friday prayers for the first time in a liberated Hazara region. He said they must remember the horrors, but move on in the spirit of the people now returning from exile in the mountains to rebuild Bamyan, although the Buddhas cannot be rebuilt. The iconoclasts have gone. Their work in Bamyan cannot be restored, but restoration of Afghanistan must begin. Many of the men who crammed the mosque and the area outside today were visibly moved at their leader's words. These descendants of Genghis Khan's Mongol invaders are now waiting for orders to move to Kabul. They do not want to see more suffering for their people.
David Loyne with the Hazaras, and I'm joined now from New York by Edward Mortimer, who is Director of Communications for the UN and also an advisor to Kofi Annan. And Mr. Mortimer, if we can just begin with the words of the Hazari leader. They are marching on Kabul because an agreement that the UN would go in first has not been kept. They feel let down by the UN.
Well, I don't think they should feel let down by the UN because it's not the UN that hasn't kept the agreement. If there was such an agreement, I guess it's those people who went in ahead when apparently they should have waited. But this is a very confused situation, and we're working to try and reach a political agreement, and that involves bringing together the different parties.
But isn't that the problem? What is happening with the Hazaras, and even with the Taliban who came to have a meeting with them, is exactly the problem that the UN can't crack, which is, as your special envoy said today, the problem is we can't get the Northern Alliance together. They're stalling on whether to sit down and have talks.
Well, I think that this will probably take a few days. In the meantime, I understand that some troops of the coalition are going in, and this is in accordance with the Security Council resolution that was passed the night before last, which encourages member states to go and provide or help provide safety and protection for civilians, particularly in Kabul.
Let's deal with those troops. Let's deal with those troops now, because as you know, the first lot of British troops at the airport outside Kabul have not been welcomed by commanders of the Northern Alliance. This does not bode well for further deployment, does it?
Well, I think the developments are moving very fast, and this is just today, and we'll have to see what the situation will be over the next few days. But remember that these are people who have consistently invoked the support of the international community. They have been able to move forward courtesy of a major military offensive by external powers. I would think that they will have to pay some attention to what those external powers say when they decide how to conduct themselves.
Did the UN ask specifically for British troops for the role at the airport?
I don't think it was a question of the UN asking for it. I think that the Security Council passed a resolution which encourages really any member state that's in a position to do so to help provide security in Afghanistan, or in the parts of Afghanistan that are no longer under Taliban control, and especially in the capital, Kabul. If the British are the best placed to do that, then I think it's quite in accordance with the resolution that they do so.
So do they have a role in the city of Kabul itself in future?
Well, I would think that in the short term they might well have. I don't think anybody's suggesting that a British garrison in Kabul would be a good long-term proposition.
But the problem is...
it would certainly be, in the short term, it would certainly be preferable to having a bloodbath, with Hazaras and Tajiks killing each other or anything like that.
So in fact, what actually might happen, is that the British troops could be put there to keep the Tajiks and the Hazaris apart, which would put them in a very difficult position.
Well, nobody's suggesting that this is an easy situation, but equally I think it is one that is developing rapidly, and there are attempts being made to deal with it. And I would have thought that the various Afghan parties will probably find it in their interests to come together at a meeting convened by the United Nations and start forming this transitional council leading to a new government. It's clearly the sense of the whole international community that Afghanistan needs a new government, and a government with the broadest possible ethnic and political base. And I think this is something that the Northern Alliance themselves have repeatedly called for. Yes, and it would be very surprising if they don't actually cooperate in bringing it about.
Well, that as may be, and we will have to see about that. But I want to put to you something that Donald Rumsfeld said. His view was that American troops would not be involved in any long-term UN peacekeeping mission. Is that the case?
Well, first of all, we're not at this stage talking about a UN peacekeeping mission in the sense of a blue helmet mission. I think what's happening is what we call an authorization by the Security Council of a multinational force composed of member states that volunteer to do it. Now, what role in that the United States would play, I think, is up to them and to the other members of the force.
Very briefly, can I just move? I'm afraid we're running out of time. I just want to ask very briefly one question. We've got a situation where there might be a deployment of up to 5,000 British troops. Is it possible that we might not see American troops in similar roles?
Well, I think anything is possible, but if Mr. Rumsfeld doesn't feel that's an appropriate role for the American troops, one can understand why he might feel that. And as I say, I think it's up to the states composing this rather improvised multinational force to work out exactly who does what.
Edward Mortimer, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Osama bin Laden believes the Quran, the Muslim holy book, gives him justification for his holy war against the West. The Taliban believes it justifies their putting women behind the veil and ruling with a rod of iron. But millions of Muslims all over the world simply do not recognize that interpretation of the Quran. At the start of the Muslim Holy Month, Robert Piggott, the BBC's religious affairs correspondent, examines how one book has come to mean so many different things.
All over Britain, Muslims are coming together for the sake of Islam. They're motivated by the danger radicals pose to their faith at a time of crisis. A meeting at the University of Leicester brings Muslim and non-Muslim students together to discuss the war in Afghanistan. Nadeem Kazmi of the Al-Hoy Foundation tells them that extremists are getting a disproportionate voice in the debate over the war. He wants mainstream Muslims to challenge Osama bin Laden's claim that his violence is in the service of Allah.
He accuses Muslims who don't heed his call for a so-called jihad of apostasy. But what gives him the right to issue edicts? Where has he received his training as an Islamic scholar? I would like to see Muslims come together, not in a piecemeal way, but in as a united front, possibly through the Organization of Islamic Conference, possibly through some international institution that will, as a coalition, say to Osama bin Laden that you are not one of us, you do not represent what we represent.
Islam does not, however, make it easy to silence those who claim falsely to represent it. It's because the Prophet Muhammad, to whom God revealed the Quran, was not himself divine. Where Jesus is to Christians a mediator in their relationship with God, Muhammad claimed only to be God's messenger. It means there's still no single spiritual authority, no Muslim pope, able to excommunicate self-appointed mullahs such as Osama bin Laden.
If the first president does not claim that he's the medium, then the entire concept of hierarchy breaks down. There won't be any hierarchy.
So when there is a need for guidance in Islamic law, where do the people giving that guidance get their authority from?
Their authority is vested in understanding, in the knowledge of Islam, in the knowledge of Islamic law. Because they have got to understand the concept of justice, the concept on which the law is based.
So who decides who's qualified then?
That is another question, which is complicated. There is no centralized institute to decide who is more qualified. It's a free-for-all.
The religious authority so badly needed today to discredit Osama bin Laden did once effectively exist. Historically, the imams of the holy cities of Medina and Mecca were respected as interpreters of Muslim law. So was the Islamic University of Al-Azhar in Cairo. But sustained interference by politicians has undermined their once unimpeachable prestige.
The Vice-Chancellor of Al-Azhar University at one time, was considered by the whole of the Muslim Ummah as someone who can offer guidelines for concerns and issues of Muslim importance to the whole Muslim world. But gradually, that importance has also disappeared because these offices have become political appointments.
Many Muslims say that the strength of their religion lies in the individual relationship, the personal relationship that each Muslim has with Allah. They say the lack of any spiritual arbiter makes for an egalitarian faith, for intellectual freedom. This is, say Muslims, more of a religion and less of a form of social control. But the lack of coherent authority also undermines the ability of Muslims to speak with a single decisive voice or to discipline those whose statements harm Islam. Internationally, it creates a situation in which any Muslim can be heard, however malign their message. And even where the message is not malign, at a time of crisis like the conflict in Afghanistan, the leadership vacuum can add to the suspicion and confusion about Islam. At Ilford Mosque in East London, Imam Muhammad Yunus uses Friday prayer to preach a message of reconciliation. Imam Yunus's opposition to the war is widely shared. The difference in emphasis lies in his attitude to Osama bin Laden.
We do not know for sure whether he is behind these actions or whether there is someone else behind them. He hasn't come out in public, no one has seen any of his books, nor do they know his ideology or approach. At present, it's only America which is issuing propaganda against him, therefore they are the only ones who know about it.
Imam Yunus tells his congregation that the solution to war is love and understanding, but the message from other imams is more radical. Most British imams were born in Pakistan, and of those an estimated 70% do not speak English. Their interpretation of Islam is conservative and robust.
These imams, they are doing so many good things for the community, for the sake of Islam, but there is no one single person who can dictate to them that, look, this is the cut point, this is the official policy. It may be in some respects useful for the community because it gives flexibility and freedom and internal democracy, but at the same time, on certain occasions, it is a problem as well.
For the head of the Anglican Church, the diffuse leadership of Islam has become an acute problem. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. George Carey, went to Al Jazeera television in Qatar in an effort to persuade Muslims to turn the conflict in Afghanistan into an opportunity for better dialogue.
From my point of view, focusing on leadership has been a great difficulty. But I think we're getting there in the United Kingdom. Indeed, the setting up of a forum for Christians and Muslims, which has taken some time, we're hoping to establish sometime next year. But I think when it comes to issues of conflict, focusing on the leadership and finding who speaks for Islam can be a great difficulty.
At the end of their meeting to discuss the war, students in Leicester said moderate voices should represent Islam.
The mainstream perspective should be heard. We need a united opinion of Islam. We need the united belief to be expressed throughout the world. All Muslims need to unite, whether they're Sunni, Shia, no matter what it is.
Other Muslim students were strong in their defence of Islam, just as it is.
The very beauty of Islam is that we don't have a person who could interpret it. We've got Quran in front of every single Muslim, and this is there for interpretation.
There is a role for interpretation in the Quran, in the areas where the Quran needs further expounding, and certainly the expounding shouldn't come from Bush or Blair.
The Quran is for Muslims the direct word of God. Only deeper knowledge of it enhances a Muslim's right to interpret the will of Allah. But Islam's strength is also its weakness. Extremists readily quote the Quran to justify their violence and repression. And there's been no one figure with sufficient authority to contradict them.
Robert Piggott. In a moment, Newsnight Review, but first a roundup of today's headlines. Commanders of the Northern Alliance have said they don't want British forces to get involved in peacekeeping in Afghanistan. Around 100 Marines are at Bagram Airport, north of the capital, Kabul. The jury at the Sarah Payne murder trial was told today that a strand of her hair was found on a sweatshirt belonging to the defendant, Roy Whiting. Timothy Langdale QC for the prosecution said the chances that the hair did not belong to the murdered schoolgirl were 1 in a billion. Roy Whiting denies the charges of kidnap and murder. The trial is expected to last 4 weeks. The High Court has ruled that former soldiers called as witnesses in the Bloody Sunday inquiry will not have to give evidence in Londonderry. The paratroopers had argued their lives would be in danger. Instead, they'll testify from London by video link. Relatives of the 14 people who died on Bloody Sunday are to appeal against the decision. And the markets, the FT 100 share index rose, while in New York the Dow Jones fell. Against the pound, the euro was up. Against the dollar, sterling fell. Well, I'll be back with the newspaper front pages later, but now it's over to Mark Lawson for Newsnight Review.
Hello, and as music is heard in Kabul again, the war touches entertainment here. A book about the notorious but still little known Osama bin Laden is published. And this week sees the release of a movie about life in Afghanistan under the Taliban. Plus the RSC offering A Carol for Christmas, Lewis Carroll that is. And is BBC One's The Way We Live Now about more than the way they lived then?
Quite quick already in anticipation.
And here to reveal the way they think now are journalist Rosie Boycott, former editor of The Independent and The Daily Express, the writer and critic Paul Morley, and journalist and BBC foreign correspondent Charles Wheeler. As this week has been the second most significant period since the September the 11th emergency began, our first two items tonight are cultural reflections of those events, an American book and a movie about Afghanistan. We start with the film. While all political dictatorships have exercised at least some censorship, the Taliban regime in Afghanistan is probably the first to have banned entertainment more or less completely. Under its savage reading of Islamic law, all visual images and many sounds were banned. The reports this week from Kabul after the Taliban's flight, with music playing in the street and television sets being sold again, emphasised the extent of the previous cultural drought. Being a movie director under the Taliban meant either exile, idleness or execution. But the Iranian filmmaker Mohsen Maghmalbaf has continued to make movies on the Afghanistan border, with secret excursions inside. And in a piece of good luck after so much bad, it opens in Britain this week at the moment of maximum interest in Afghanistan, and on the day that the city named in the title is reported to have fallen from the Taliban. Kandahar follows an Afghani woman, a journalist exiled in Canada, who re-enters the country after learning that her sister has threatened to commit suicide.
Here near the Afghan border, young girls who are about to return to Afghanistan are being taught about the dangers of landmines. They're being told not to approach those dolls that you once touched and which blew off your legs when we were escaping, so they won't lose their legs like you did.
Kandahar. Charles Wheeler, this film is released today, I think, because not many films wanted to go up against Harry Potter, but it's hard to imagine more perfect timing for a movie.
Because of what's happening in Kandahar and everywhere else, and the whole place flying apart, apparently.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Mahalba, the filmmaker, called Afghanistan a country without an image. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? I mean, Taliban made Afghanistan virtually invisible. And the burqa is his symbol of invisibility. It's a film about women. It's a film about Afghanistan, but above all, it's a film about women. And it is extraordinarily powerful. I mean, it really does deserve a proper release. Probably won't get it, but it does deserve it. It's a great film.
It might now after these events. Rosie Boycott, as Charles suggests, watching a movie about a culture in which movies are banned is a pretty rare event, but an extraordinary one. And people might expect poignancy, worthiness, all of that they might fear, but there are extraordinary images in this film and even jokes. I mean, that's what surprised me.
No, it's a truly awesome film, this. I mean, it seems that everything you'd read about life under the burqa, a million words were not worth as much as 5 minutes of this film. I mean, you entered into this silent, scary world, and you saw the image of them pulling the veil down over their face and shutting themselves out. There are 3 or 4 images in that film that quite extraordinary. One was one we just saw when they show those dolls, and the sense of the fragility of those little girls jumping on it, and the cruelty of this country is just terrible. And then later on, the woman trying desperately to get to Kandahar, curiously, she has to try to get there by the eclipse, because this is when her sister has told her she's going to commit suicide because her life is so awful. And she is sick, and so she has to be treated by a doctor. And you see this thing that, again, you've kind of read about, that, you know, women are not allowed to be treated by male doctors. And they, again, he talks to her through a sheet, and there's a very small hole, and he says things like, put your ear near the sheet, put your mouth. And it's communicated, and there's translation going on from a little boy. And it gives you, in a very few minutes, awareness of just how frightening, lonely and scary this is. And of course, the film has a lot of menace. Although this plot is truly simple and involves people on the way, and it's partly documentary, you sort of know in your heart that it's not going to be all right in the end, and it isn't. And she is wonderful, that actress as well, whoever she is. She's beautiful, and you want to watch her all the time.
And the thing that struck me, it's one of the most powerful images I've seen all year, that image you say where she has put the mouth to the doctor, the hole in the doctor's sheet. The extraordinary thing is, it's the Samuel Beckett image from Not I, but not as a metaphor. It's actually, that is real
reality.
Life. I mean,
is reality.
Quite an extraordinary thing. Paul Morley, high praise over there.
Yes, well, it's a beautiful and moving film, very chilling. It's beautifully structured, the way that she moves into this world. It's almost like a wonderland with a series of grotesque characters as she meets along the way, and each set of circumstances she comes along, you get that slightly set up before she arrives, and so there's a beautiful flowing structure to it. A very powerful woman's movie as well, which is kind of interesting. It's the kind of film, actually, that even if it wasn't made under the present circumstances, you would absolutely love, just as a really great piece of storytelling, and the vastness and the brightness of Afghanistan. Suddenly you're getting all of that filled in, the humanity of the place, the people who are still desperately trying to live a life, the way that they make up under their burqas, and the lipstick gets passed around, and they're still trying to look glamorous in ultimately a very glamorous part of the world, really. And it is incredibly funny. I mean, the one-armed guy at the end, who takes on a final part of the journey, is a fantastic comedian. I mean, I imagine in a Mike Leigh sense almost, a natural kind of guy. They just found him, but a very funny man, and he's in drag. He dresses up in a burqa. The idea that there's a bit of drag in this film is extraordinary. But the sequences, I mean, the memorable sequences at any time whatsoever. When the limbs are being dropped from helicopters, and the guys with no limbs at all are racing to get these limbs. This is no special effect, and we're so used now to this language of film being, cheating us almost with its contrivance. There's no contrivance in this film. This is real.
But when we've heard so many stories of journalists from John Simmons downwards or upwards, depending on which way you look at it, dressing up in that, when you see this woman doing this, you get a real sense of what these people have been doing to try to get into Afghanistan, I thought, Rosie.
Yes, but you also see what a complete disguise it is. I mean, once you're under it, it is total.
You wouldn't know if it's John Simmons or anyone.
And of course, actually, from a woman's point of view, I mean, once you're under the burqa, you are then relatively safe from men. And that actually men aren't going to come along and lift it up. So in fact, as a disguise, it's A, brilliant, because you can't tell who's underneath it, and it's a form of safety and armour, because it's there precisely to stop men touching your wife who might be under that burqa.
Well, and we've heard stories this week of women now they could appear being worried because you lose the protection.
Well, you lose the protection, and I think it's a very important thing, this. I mean, I lived in Kuwait at the end of the 70s, and Kuwait had had an enormous revolution in the sense of suddenly being westernised, and suddenly from, literally, I had friends whose mothers used to bring the water in from the well, carried on their head, and now they're living in these high-tech houses, and they all found that it had gone too far, and they were very scared, and they went back to the veil. So these were women wearing Western clothes, and they would adopt a headdress, which said something about them. And I think for all those women, especially slightly older ones, this is going to be really terrifying, a sense that suddenly you've got to take it off, and you've got to have sexual relationships with people, and be something different, and it's going to be frightening.
Paul, I thought you realised what a smart filmmaker he is, because it's a Hollywood rule that your hero-heroine has to have some kind of time limit. And although it seems whimsical, the thing of having to get to the eclipse, he realised, obviously, that there had to be something for her to keep saying that I have to get there by this date in a relatively timeless society.
Well, absolutely. For a filmmaker that's sometimes compared to Jean-Luc Godard, and therefore breaking all sorts of rules, in a way, there's a real corny conventionality to the film that helps you swallow some of the bitterness of it. And there's no doubt that 3-day thing in any other circumstances you would kind of groan.
It's a magical realist version of the bomb about to go off.
Absolutely, but it's interesting about the burqas as well, because that supplies another great piece of comedy, is that